My name is Linda, but people call me Lynn, and I'm 61 years old. I thought I had weathered every kind of storm life could throw at me. Losing my husband too soon, raising my son alone, scraping by when money was tight. But nothing prepared me for the day I stood in the ruins of my home, clutching my wedding ring like it was the only piece of my life that still belonged to me. The earthquake came without mercy. One moment I was making tea. The next, the ground opened beneath me, walls groaned, and the house Harold and I bought in 1985 crumbled like it was made of sand. When the silence finally came, I climbed the basement steps and found only sky where my ceiling had been. My rose garden, my kitchen table, the photographs that told my family's story, all of it scattered, broken, gone. Neighbors offered blankets and tea, but I felt hollow. Everything I'd built, every memory, had collapsed in minutes. And yet, as cruel as that destruction was, it wasn't the worst heartbreak waiting for me. Because when I turned to the one person I thought I could lean on, my son, Marcus, the ground gave way in a different kind of quake. His words cut sharper than shattered glass, leaving wounds no rescue crew could mend. Losing my house was devastation. Hearing what he said when I showed up at his door was betrayal. And that pain? Well, that was worse than rubble. Before the earthquake, my days followed a rhythm that felt comforting in its ordinariness. I'd wake around 6, even though there was no reason to rush anymore. Old habits die hard. The first thing I did was slip on Harold's sweater, the navy one he used to wear when he mowed the lawn. It's frayed at the cuffs now, but the faint scent of him still clings to it, even 8 years after he passed. I'd shuffle into the kitchen, fill the kettle, and brew a cup of English breakfast. That first sip, steaming in my favorite chipped mug, was the moment I felt steady enough to face the day. My house was modest, but filled with warmth. I had my little routines, watering the roses along the front walk, clipping back the lavender, waving at Mrs. Poster, Patterson across the street as she collected her morning paper. On Thursdays, I'd drive to the post office to send letters to my cousin in Michigan, and on Sundays, I walked to church, where I sat in the same pew every week, just behind the choir. The community knew me, and I knew them. We traded zucchini bread and tomatoes in summer, shoveled one another's sidewalks in winter. It was the kind of neighborhood where you could leave your door unlocked without worry. Inside, my world revolved around memories. On the wall above the fireplace hung the wedding photo of Harold and me, taken on a warm June afternoon in 1982. His smile was so wide it made everyone else smile too. I wore my mother's pearl necklace that day, the same one I keep tucked safely in my jewelry box. The photo album filled with Marcus's childhood, his first tooth, his awkward school portraits, the Christmas mornings where wrapping paper covered every inch of carpet sat on the coffee table. Sometimes, when the evenings grew long, I'd flip through its pages and trace my finger over the images, like touching the past could hold it in place. But the most precious thing was the ring. My wedding ring. It wasn't fancy, just a simple gold band, but it had never left my finger, not once, even after Harold died. That ring wasn't just jewelry, it was a promise I still kept, a tether to the life we built. Alongside it, I kept the deed to the house, folded neatly in an envelope inside my desk drawer. That paper represented security to me. As long as I had the deed, I had stability. That's what I told myself. That house was more than walls. It was where Marcus took his first steps, where Harold and I celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, where grief and joy both had a home. Marcus, my only child, had grown into a man who lived a very different life than mine. He moved to Tulsa when he was promoted to regional manager at an insurance company. His neighborhood looked like something out of a magazine. Perfectly manicured lawns, shiny cars and driveways, Christmas lights that all matched. I visited once and felt like I had stepped into a showroom instead of a street where people actually lived. We weren't close, not the way I thought mothers and sons were supposed to be. After Harold died, I clung to Marcus, hoping we'd find comfort in each other. But Marcus pulled away. He started visiting less, calling only when he remembered. Sometimes, weeks passed without a word, and when I finally worked up the courage to call him, I often got his voicemail. He'd return the call eventually, always rushed, always distracted. "Sorry, Mom, busy day at work," or "Can we talk later?" Later rarely came. When he introduced me to Rebecca, his girlfriend, I did my best to be welcoming. She was younger than Marcus by a few years, polished in a way I never was. Nails always perfect, hair like she just left a salon, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes when it turned toward me. She'd drop little hints that I didn't belong. Once, when I offered to bring a casserole for a dinner she was hosting, she laughed lightly and said, "Oh, that's sweet, but we don't really do that kind of food." Another time, she suggested Marcus and I schedule visits, as if I were a client fitting into his calendar. I brushed those moments off. I told myself she was nervous, maybe unsure how to fit me into their world. But there was something about the way she held Marcus's arm a little tighter when I was around, as if to remind both him and me that he belonged to her now. Still, I convinced myself that once they married, things would settle. Surely Rebecca would soften once she felt secure. I wanted to believe that. Looking back, I see the cracks more clearly. The unanswered calls, the rushed visits where Marcus checked his watch more than he looked at me, the Christmas I spent alone because they decided to take a trip to Colorado without telling me until the day before. At the time, I told myself it was just life, that children grow up and create their own paths. I didn't want to face the truth that Marcus was drifting away, and I was holding on tighter to a rope he'd already let go of. So I poured myself into my routines, my community, and the home that kept me grounded. I'd walk through each room and feel Harold's presence, like he was still watching over me. The deed, the ring, the photo album, they were more than objects. They were anchors. They told me I still belonged somewhere, even as the years made me feel invisible in my son's world. I had no way of knowing then how quickly all of it, the routines, the neighborhood, the symbols of my security, would be shattered. And I certainly didn't know that the earthquake wouldn't be the only force to rip the ground out from under me. The real quake, the one that would test my dignity in ways I never imagined, was waiting in Tulsa, behind my son's front door. It was a Tuesday that started like any other. I'd just finished watering the roses when the air shifted. The sky darkened, not the gray of rain, but an eerie greenish black that made my stomach twist. I'd lived in Oklahoma long enough to know that color meant danger. Then came the siren shrill, urgent, cutting through the quiet of the afternoon. My heart raced. I grabbed the emergency radio Harold had insisted we keep all those years ago. The announcer's voice shook as he warned of a major earthquake moving straight toward our neighborhood. My neighborhood. I had minutes, maybe less. My hands trembled as I ran through the house, grabbing what mattered most. Harold's sweater, still folded at the end of my bed. The envelope with the house deed tucked inside my desk. The wedding ring never left my finger, but I tugged the photo album from the coffee table, slipping it into a small suitcase. 40 years of living, reduced to what I could carry. The walls groaned. The floor heaved beneath me. I stumbled down the basement stairs, clutching the suitcase like it held my heartbeat. In the corner, I crouched, sweater pressed against my face. The sound was indescribable, like a freight train ripping through timber, like the earth itself had decided it was done holding us. And then, silence. When I pushed open the basement door, my legs nearly gave out. Where my living room once stood, there was nothing but sky. The roof was gone. Walls lay splintered across the lawn. The kitchen table where Marcus once did his homework was jammed sideways into what remained of the garage. My rose garden was churned into dirt and broken branches. My home, our home, was gone. I sank to the ground, clutching Harold's sweater. For the first time since his funeral, I sobbed so hard I couldn't breathe. That night, Mrs. Patterson from across the street took me in. She wrapped me in blankets and made me tea, though her own house had cracks running through the walls. We sat together in silence, two women trying to make sense of what had just been taken from us. The Red Cross had set up shelters, but the thought of sleeping on a cot among strangers made me feel even more lost. I lay awake on her sofa, staring at the ceiling, the deed and photo album resting by my side. Every creak in her house made me jump, afraid the ground would turn on us again. By morning, I knew I couldn't stay. I only had one person left in the world to call, Marcus, Mrs. Isis N. Day. Patterson lent me her phone since mine was buried under rubble. My hands shook as I dialed his number. When he answered, his voice was groggy, like I'd woken him from a nap. "Marcus," I said, my throat thick, "the house, it's gone." "I don't know where to go." There was silence. Too long of a silence. Finally, he exhaled. "Well, I guess you'd better come here." His tone wasn't warm. Not the relief I had expected, just hesitation, clipped and strained. Still, those words, "come here," were all I had to hold on to. I hung up, staring at the phone in my lap. I should have felt comfort, but instead a heaviness settled in my chest. The earthquake had ripped away my house, but what Marcus said, or maybe what he didn't say, planted a new fear inside me. I packed the few belongings I'd saved, hugged Mrs. Patterson tightly, and whispered my thanks. As she waved me off, I couldn't shake the sense that the true aftershock wasn't behind me. It was waiting 45 minutes down the road, in Tulsa, at my son's doorstep. Driving to Tulsa felt like moving between two worlds. I left behind streets filled with rubble and entered neighborhoods where lawns were perfectly trimmed, mailboxes polished, and houses lined up like postcards. Marcus's home sat on a corner lot, its brick front gleaming under the sun. A sleek black car shone in the driveway. The whole scene looked untouched by disaster, almost smug in its perfection. I parked my borrowed car, Mrs. Angle B. Patterson's grandson had driven me to pick it up from a friend, and walked up the drive with my suitcase bumping along behind me. My heart thudded. I wasn't sure what kind of welcome I'd receive. Rebecca opened the door before I could knock. She was dressed like she'd just stepped out of a catalog, white blouse, gold earrings, not a hair out of place. Her smile was thin, polite in a way that carried no warmth. "Oh, Linda," she said, not bothering to use my nickname. "You made it." Her eyes flicked to the suitcase, then back to me. "Marcus is still at work." "But come in, I suppose." The word "suppose" hit harder than she realized. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lavender polish. Everything gleamed: floors, counters, even the stainless steel appliances. But what struck me most wasn't the shine, it was what was missing. Not a single photo of Marcus as a child. Not one picture of Harold or of me. The walls were filled with Rebecca's framed prints, abstract art, fashion shots, and a massive canvas of a beach scene. It was as though Marcus's life before Rebecca had been erased. I lowered myself onto the edge of a cream-colored sofa, afraid even to wrinkle the cushions. Rebecca perched on a chair across from me, legs crossed, scrolling through her phone. "So," she began, her tone measured, "how long do you think you'll be needing to stay?" The question came so quickly I barely had time to process it. I swallowed. "Well, the house is gone. I don't know how long the insurance will take or what my options are." I was hoping. Her phone dinged. She glanced at it, smiled, then looked back up at me. "Right. It's just, Marcus and I really value our privacy." "You understand?" I nodded, though my chest burned. "Privacy." As if I were a stranger intruding on their carefully curated world. That evening, Marcus came home, his tie loosened, shoulders slumped. For a moment, relief washed over me. My boy. But he only offered a quick hug, awkward, distracted. "Hey, Mom. Glad you made it safe?" His eyes darted to Rebecca. She gave a small nod, and he turned away to hang his jacket. Over the next few days, little things began to gnaw at me. Doors closed whenever I walked down the hall. Once, I opened the study door to ask Marcus a question and caught him sliding papers into a drawer. He startled, then forced a smile. "Just work stuff, Mom. Confidential." His tone was light, but his eyes told a different story. At night, I'd hear murmurs through the walls. Rebecca's sharper voice, Marcus's lower one. My name floated once or twice in the mix. The next morning, both of them would be polite but distant, like actors on stage. I tried to make myself useful. I cooked dinners, folded laundry, watered the plants by the back patio. Rebecca would thank me, her words coated with sugar but stiff as cardboard. One night, as I washed the dishes, she came up behind me. "You don't need to bother with that," she said softly, though her voice carried an edge. "We have a system. A system." My presence, it seemed, disrupted every system they had. The worst was the photographs. I'd brought my photo album with me, the one I'd rescued from the rubble. One afternoon, I set it on the coffee table, thinking Marcus might flip through it, remember those days when we were closer. But the next morning, it was gone. I found it tucked under the sofa, as if someone had slipped it out of sight. Rebecca's prints glared down from the walls. I stared at them and felt my own history shrinking, pushed into shadows. In quiet moments, when Marcus was at work, I'd sit in the guest room and finger the envelope holding the deed. It felt heavier now, as though it carried more than paper. The ring on my finger dug into my skin, reminding me of promises made long ago, promises of belonging. But here, in my son's house, I felt more like a guest than family. I tried calling Marcus one afternoon while he was at work, just to ask about errands. His phone went to voicemail. Hours later, he texted back, short and clipped, "Busy. Talk later." It echoed all the rushed conversations from the past, and I felt that same hollow ache. Each day the unease grew. Rebecca's eyes lingered on me like she was counting down the days until I left. Marcus avoided real conversations, burying himself in work. And me. I sat quietly, listening, watching, holding on to the fragments I'd saved from the earthquake, and wondering if the real disaster hadn't started the moment I walked into this house. I didn't want to admit it, but deep down I sensed it. I wasn't welcome here. Not truly, not for long. It happened on a Tuesday evening after dinner. Rebecca had excused herself early, claiming she had emails to catch up on. Marcus stayed behind at the table, poking at the remnants of his food. I offered to make coffee, but he shook his head, already half gone in thought. I carried the dishes to the sink, washed them quietly, and then drifted down the hall toward the guest room. As I passed Marcus's study, I heard voices, Rebecca's sharp, Marcus's low. The door was cracked just enough for sound to leak out. I shouldn't have lingered. But something in Rebecca's tone froze me where I stood. "She can't stay here, Marcus," she hissed. "It's our home, not hers." The words sliced through me, each one deliberate, merciless. My breath caught. I pressed my palm against the wall for balance. "She's lost everything," Marcus murmured. His voice was low, hesitant. I leaned closer, desperate to hear him defend me, to hear strength in his tone. But Rebecca cut him off. "And that doesn't mean she gets to move in forever. We have our lives, our routines. Privacy matters. You said yourself she overwhelms you sometimes." Silence followed. A silence heavier than the earthquake rubble I'd crawled out from. I waited, heart pounding, for Marcus to say something, anything that would anchor me. To say, "She's my mother, Rebecca. This is her home too." But he didn't. The silence stretched long enough to tell me everything. My son, my only son, stood there in his own house, letting his partner speak of me as though I were an intruder. And he didn't defend me. He didn't fight. He didn't even try. I stumbled back from the door, nearly tripping over the edge of the rug. My chest tightened, air refusing to fill my lungs. The wedding ring on my finger felt suddenly cold, as if Harold himself had recoiled in shame. I slipped into the guest room and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my hands. The tremor in them wouldn't stop. I had lived through a roof caving in, through walls crumbling around me, through sirens and screams and the unnatural green-black of a furious sky. But nothing had struck me like the sound of my son's silence. It was worse than losing my house, worse than standing in the ruins of my kitchen and seeing only sky. This was a collapse of something far deeper, a foundation I had thought unshakable. Marcus had always been distant, yes. Calls unanswered, visits cut short. But I'd told myself it was work or stress or the busyness of adult life. I'd believed that beneath all of it, the bond between us was steady, waiting, like bedrock. Now I knew better. Rebecca's words echoed in my ears. It's our home, not hers. And Marcus had said nothing. I felt the weight of the objects I'd carried from the rubble, the photo album tucked under the bed, Harold's sweater folded carefully in my suitcase, the envelope with the deed sealed tight. All of it suddenly seemed like relics of a world I alone remembered. My son didn't look back. He didn't even try to hold on. Rebecca's hostility was clear as glass. But what I couldn't understand was why. Why did she bristle at me so fiercely? Why did my presence ignite such resistance? I hadn't demanded anything. I cooked, cleaned, kept quiet. I tried not to take up space. And yet, to her, I was already too much. And Marcus was choosing silence. It struck me then that survival wasn't just about crawling out of ruins or clutching at keepsakes. It was about facing the truth when it cracked open in front of you. I lay down on the bed, the room spinning. The house creaked faintly, pipes settling. I wondered how long Rebecca would let me stay, and whether Marcus would ever grow a spine strong enough to hold me upright again. The earthquake had stolen my home. But this silence, it threatened to steal my family, and I didn't know which loss hurt more. The change began subtly, the way cracks spider across glass before it finally shatters. At first, it was Rebecca moving my overnight bag from the guest room into the hallway, saying lightly, "Oh, I thought you might prefer more space in there, so I cleared it out." The bag ended up in the garage, wedged between golf clubs and a box of Christmas decorations. She smiled like it was nothing, but the sting burned deep. My belongings, what little I had left, were treated like clutter. Then came the comments. At breakfast, when I made eggs the way Marcus used to like them, Rebecca wrinkled her nose. "We don't usually eat so heavy in the mornings." At night, if I watched the news in the living room, she'd sigh and say she needed quiet for her yoga session. Even the way I folded laundry seemed to bother her. "We prefer our towels rolled, not stacked," she chirped, plucking them from my hands. It wasn't about towels. It was about space, control. Marcus noticed, I could tell, but instead of stepping in, he withdrew. His office door closed more often. He left earlier in the mornings, claiming there was a big project at work. He returned late, his face tired, his eyes darting anywhere but mine. The more Rebecca pushed, the further he retreated, until I felt like a ghost haunting the edges of their home. I tried to stay small. I kept the guest room tidy, cooked only when asked, spent hours in silence flipping through the photo album. But dignity has a way of slipping through your fingers when you're constantly told you're in the way. One night, after another strained dinner where Rebecca barely spoke to me, Marcus retreated to his study. I couldn't hold it in any longer. I followed him, standing in the doorway as he typed at his computer. "Marcus," I began softly. My voice trembled despite my effort to steady it. "We need to talk," he sighed, turning in his chair. "Mom, it's late." "Late?" I stepped inside. "Marcus, I lost everything. My house, my neighborhood, the life I built with your father. I've been trying so hard not to disrupt your life, but I feel like I'm being erased." His jaw tightened. "You're not being erased. Then why is she pushing me out? Why are my things in the garage? Why does she look at me like I'm a squatter in your home?" His eyes darted toward the door, as if worried Rebecca might overhear. "You're reading too much into it." I clenched Harold's sweater tighter around my arms. "No, Marcus, I'm not." "You think I don't hear the whispers? That I didn't hear her say I don't belong here?" His silence confirmed everything. "Marcus," I whispered, my throat raw. "When your father died, do you remember who held everything together? Who worked double shifts just to keep this family standing? Who sat up nights with you during your asthma attacks, holding your hand, praying you'd breathe easier?" His eyes softened for a moment, flickering with something, guilt, maybe, or memory. But then he shook his head. "Things are different now, Mom," he said quietly. "I have my own life. My own family." The words cut clean through me. My own family. As if I wasn't part of it, as if I were some outdated chapter, a preface no one bothers to read anymore. I sank into the chair across from him, gripping the armrest so I wouldn't fall apart. And what am I, Marcus? Just temporary? Until Rebecca gets her way? He rubbed his forehead. Please don't make this harder. Rebecca she values privacy. She's not used to sharing space. It's stressful. Stressful? My voice broke. Do you know what stressful is? Standing in the ruins of your home, clutching a photo album because it's all you have left of your life? That's stress, Marcus, not having your mother under your roof for a few weeks. He looked away, staring at the bookshelf as if the spines of those novels held answers he couldn't find in me. His silence told me more than words ever could. He had already made his choice. Rebecca wanted me gone, and Marcus, my boy, the child I raised from infancy into manhood, wasn't going to stop her. I stood slowly, every bone in my body aching, not just from age but from the weight of rejection. I never thought I'd see the day when my son would treat me like a burden. He flinched, but said nothing. As I closed the study door behind me, my reflection caught in the glass cabinet down the hall. I barely recognized the woman staring back, her eyes red, her shoulders hunched, her dignity chipped away piece by piece. In that moment, I realized something brutal but undeniable. My presence wasn't just inconvenient. It threatened the picture Rebecca wanted to paint of her life with Marcus. A picture where I didn't exist, and Marcus, whether out of fear, love, or weakness, was letting her paint it. I'd been living in Marcus's house for 3 weeks when the truth finally came crashing down. Not in the way an earthquake tears walls apart, but in whispers and hidden papers that told me everything. It happened on a quiet afternoon when Rebecca and Marcus were both out. The silence was heavy, the kind that pressed against your chest. I decided to gather my things from the garage. At least I could keep them neatly together, away from her sideways glances. As I moved boxes aside, I noticed a stack of files balanced on top of a plastic storage bin. They weren't mine. Neatly labeled folders, the kind Marcus used for work. One had slipped open, and a paper half slid out. I bent down to tuck it back, and that's when my eye caught the bold header, Insurance Claim. Meebrook Subdivision. My breath hitched. That was my neighborhood, my street. I pulled the folder out, hands shaking. Inside were documents detailing the projected value of the land once the insurance settlement was approved. And there, in neat bullet points, were Marcus and Rebecca's names listed as primary contacts. My name was nowhere. My chest burned. I flipped further and found a typed note, probably a draft email. Once proceeds are cleared, plan to put property on market immediately. Existing deed has not been located, but will pursue affidavit of ownership. Affidavit of ownership. My throat went dry. They wanted to sell my land. My home. Erase me completely. And then, it struck me. The house deed, the one document I had shoved into my suitcase in the frenzy before the quake. The very paper I'd clutched in the basement while the world roared above me. Without it, they could have succeeded. I sat there in the dim garage, clutching both sets of papers, the one I'd saved in desperation and the ones they'd hidden, plotting behind closed doors. Tears blurred my vision, but they weren't just grief. They were fury, betrayal, and something sharper than either. When I heard the car pull up in the driveway, my body went cold. I didn't move. I wanted them to see me. To see what I held. Rebecca's heels clicked first, her voice lilting as she laughed at something Marcus said. But the moment she saw me sitting there among the boxes, her laughter stopped. "What are you doing in here?" Her voice was sharp now, all pretense stripped away. I stood slowly, holding up the insurance papers. "I should be asking you the same." Marcus froze in the doorway. "Mom, don't," I cut him off. My voice was steady, steadier than I felt. "I found them, Marcus. The claim. The plan to sell my land. My home." Rebecca's face didn't even flush. If anything, she squared her shoulders, as though she'd been waiting for this. "You had no right to go through our things." "Our things?" I laughed bitterly. "You mean my things. My house. My house. My land. You wanted to erase me and take what's mine." Rebecca's eyes narrowed. "You're being dramatic. That house was rubble." That land is worthless without money to rebuild. Marcus and I were trying to make something useful out of it. I turned to my son. Is that true? Were you planning to sell the land behind my back? His jaw worked, but no words came. He didn't deny it. The silence cut deeper than any admission. Rebecca stepped forward. You don't understand, Lynn. You've been clinging to the past, dragging Marcus down with you. He has his own life now. We have plans, a future. You standing here with your photo albums and your dead husband's sweater. It's like you're trying to chain him to a life that's over. The cruelty of her words stole my breath. But I forced myself to stand taller. I reached into my sweater pocket and pulled out the folded, worn paper I had guarded like gold, the original house deed. I held it up between us. You mean this? Rebecca's eyes flickered for the first time. Her bravado cracked. This land is mine, I said, my voice shaking with emotion but strong enough to fill the garage. I'd built that home with Harold. We raised Marcus there. Every rose I planted in that garden, every picture hung on those walls, it was my life. And you thought you could erase me with a few papers? Rebecca's lips curled. You can't live in the past forever. Marcus doesn't want to keep carrying you. He told me himself. I turned to my son, my heart pounding. Is that true, Marcus? Did you tell her I was a burden? His eyes finally met mine, full of something raw. Mom, he whispered, I've supported you for years. The house repairs, the bills after Dad died, you don't know how much I've done. Sometimes I felt like I couldn't breathe. The words hit like a fist. So instead of telling me you let her twist it into greed, you'd rather cut me out than face me? He swallowed hard, shame flickering across his face. But Rebecca spoke before he could. He doesn't need to justify himself. You've leaned on him long enough. It's time you stood on your own. I felt my knees weaken, but I refused to fall. Stood on my own? I lifted the deed higher. That's exactly what I've been doing. Saving this house. Saving our history. I never asked for your help, Rebecca. And Marcus, when I did lean on you, it was because I thought we were family. That's what families do, my voice cracked. But you were planning to sell the last piece of my life out from under me. Not because you needed to survive, but because you wanted to erase me. The garage was silent, but for my ragged breathing. Marcus looked at the floor. Rebecca stared at me with cold defiance. I folded the deed carefully and slid it back into my pocket. Well, you failed. Because this paper proves what I already know, I still exist. My life still matters. And you don't get to write me out of it. Rebecca's face hardened. You're selfish, Lynn. Holding Marcus back. He deserves freedom. No, I said firmly. He deserves a mother who raised him with love. And I deserve respect, not betrayal. I may have lost my house, but I will not lose my dignity. You won't erase me from my own blood. For the first time, Marcus's face crumpled. He whispered, almost to himself, Mom, but I didn't wait for him to finish. I brushed past them both, leaving the garage door swinging in my wake, the air thick with everything unsaid. That night, as I lay in the guest room with Harold's sweater wrapped around me, I stared at the ceiling and realized something. The earthquake had taken my home, but Marcus and Rebecca had tried to take something far worse, my worth, and I wasn't about to let them. When dawn broke after that confrontation, I knew I couldn't stay another day in Marcus and Rebecca's house. The walls pressed in like a prison, and my son's silence weighed heavier than any earthquake rubble. I packed the little I had, Harold's sweater, the photo album, the deed, my wedding ring, and slipped out before the coffee pot even began its morning drip. I didn't have a plan, just the knowledge that staying meant losing myself completely. There was one number, though, that I had never erased from memory. Tom Whitaker. My high school sweetheart. We'd gone separate ways, he into business, me into family life, but every so often he'd send a Christmas card or a kind note when Harold passed. He'd built himself up from nothing into a man people called a self-made millionaire. More importantly, he'd always carried a gentleness that made me feel seen. With trembling fingers, I called him from a diner payphone. When he answered, his voice was warm, familiar. I didn't even get through the whole story before he said, "Lynn, I'm glad to have you here. Tell me where you are." Within an hour, he was there. He looked older, sure gray hair, deeper lines, but his eyes held the same steadiness I remembered from being 17. He didn't pity me, didn't flinch at the ruin I carried. He simply said, "We'll sort this out." And he did. Tom connected me with his lawyer, who reviewed the deed and insurance documents. Within days, legal papers were filed to protect my rights to the land. Rebecca and Marcus's scheme unraveled quickly once sunlight touched it. The lawyer assured me, "With this deed, they can't move without your consent." Word spread, as it always does in families and towns. My sister-in-law called, her voice sharp with indignation. I heard what Marcus tried to do. Shameful. Harold would be rolling in his grave. The whispers turned to judgment, and soon Marcus and Rebecca were the ones avoiding Sunday gatherings, their smiles stretched thin under the weight of community scorn. Meanwhile, Tom didn't just help me legally, he helped me live again. He found me a cottage on the edge of town, small but filled with light. When I walked in, the first thing I did was open the top drawer of the bedside table. I placed my wedding ring inside, then the deed, side by side. Survival and justice. Harold's memory and my future balanced together. That night, sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of tea, I felt something I hadn't in months: peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had faced the worst and still stood tall. I could almost feel Harold's hand on my shoulder, the way he used to steady me when storms rattled our windows. I whispered into the quiet, "We made it, love. We're still here." If there's one truth I've learned through all of this, it's that nature can take your house, but only the people you love can try to take your dignity. And that cut is deeper than any quake or storm. I stood in rubble and survived. But the real test wasn't the earth shifting beneath me. It was my son's silence when I needed him most. Betrayal from family leaves a scar no blueprint can rebuild. Still, I discovered something I wish I had known sooner. Our worth isn't held in bricks or approval, but in the quiet strength to protect what matters. For me, it was a wedding ring, a photo album, and a deed. Small things maybe, but they carried memory, love, and proof that my life couldn't simply be signed away. To the women listening, I say this: hold on to your documents, your memories, and your self-worth. They protect you in ways four walls never can. And when someone tries to erase you, remember, you are not so easily written out. So I'll leave you with this question, one I've carried through sleepless nights and long mornings of reflection. What would you have done in my place? Comment below and tell me the city you're watching from. Let me see how far my story travels, how many hearts it reaches. Because in the end, survival isn't just about standing, it's about being heard.